right?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Okay, this presentation is about living with autism, or more specifically, high-functioning autism, which is a part of the autism spectrum disorder, or ASD. And this will also be a personal perspective, meaning my own personal experiences with this condition. I should start with a disclaimer that every person with ASD is different, has a different combination or constellation of symptoms and a different life experience with it. There's a lot of variance, but I'm at least qualified to speak from my own perspective, so I'm hoping to provide a introduction of what this is like. Because as one saying goes, if you met one ASD person, then you've met just one ASD person. But it doesn't hurt to start somewhere. Oh, I have to press the key.
Maybe you want me to do that so you can get a picture?
Oh,
Okay.
okay.
We can start with an overview of what. Oh, it wasn't past it.
What did it do?
These are the keys. The red arrows. Press the left arrow.
Sorry.
Okay. Alright, the right one will go forward. Alright. So we can start with what high-functioning autism even is. It's, as I said, it's part of the autism spectrum disorder, and AS, or Asperger's syndrome, which is a way to describe it, have limited need for assistance, because the general populace knows what autism is, but for the most part, they imagine what's known as classic autism or Kanner's autism, which is much lower functioning and involves a great deal of mental impairment, and those individuals have a lot of need for assistance. But on the other end of the scale is high functioning with much more limited need for assistance, and they can, for the most part, function in society with others like anyone else, hence the name. And it should be noted that this is not actually a disease or a personality disorder. It's actually a physical wiring of the person's brain and starts as a development as a fetus. And because of this, there's no way to actually change it or cure it. It's simply a state of being. It's the way you're born, it's the way you stay eternal life. It's not something that's undone or changes as you age. It's almost like your hair color or your eye color, except you don't dye it of different colors like you could with your hair. And as I was saying, there's no truly typical autistic individual, but there are some common aspects to ASD that are more common than others and are close to typical. So that's could be a decent starting point for someone unfamiliar with this. And as I was saying, every person has a different constellation of symptoms for this condition, and some are more common than others, and even with two people of the same one, they might have a different degree of severity for it. A point of debate in the autism community now, both individuals with this condition and those who work with them or live with them, about whether to call this condition a disability or just a difference. One camp argues that ASD is only a difference, and that calling it a disability is just a misunderstanding and puts an unfair negative connotation on it, and that it's the idea that people are people, and even if ASD makes it a bit incompatible with a otherwise neurotypical world, that's not a bad thing, and neurotypical is a term for anyone not on the spectrum at all. And others say that having ASD often has too many negative effects for it to simply be called a difference, and to do so is kind of dangerously whitewashes the difficulties these individuals might have. They shouldn't be dismissed, just the idea of calling it a difference. But there could be a middle ground for this. And I personally stand in the middle ground that some individuals having ASD is largely just a difference in how you think and how you perceive the world and what you like to do. But in other ways, even with higher functioning individuals, there is a certain fundamental disconnect with the neurotypical world that can sometimes lead to misunderstandings. And the consequences of that can be minor or major depending on what happens. It can be anything from telling an inappropriate joke at the wrong time, all the way to trouble with the police or getting fired from your job because you said the wrong thing to your boss. It varies. And I think there is merit to both sides, and that the middle ground is the best place to stand. And based on my own position of this condition, I would consider it the middle ground of just a difference and an actual disability that hampers my everyday life. Social anxiety is one of the most common symptoms of ASD, and it is one of the symptoms of it that is most common, and it can be considered one of the most typical, so it's a good starting point for understanding ASD. Now, as for why ASD individuals get social anxiety, it's mostly because They are stressed by the constant awareness of their neurological and irreparable differences between them and neurotypicals. They are always aware that they are an other who is prone to being misunderstood or made fun of or excluded or anything else negative. And that can weigh on the mind at different degrees during the day and can become much stronger when you're facing a neurotypical person, especially in a very demanding context or when there's something at stake such as a job interview or going on a date with someone, or when another person's being very emotional such as they're upset or they're angry or something like that. And ASD individuals knows that they're not fully equipped to handle this person the way another neurotypical could. And that can lead to misunderstandings ranging from not getting a joke all the way to getting fired from your job because you said something wrong, or watching a date with someone and not seeing them again, anything like that. It can interfere with your work, your education, such as at your high school or at a college you're attending. Like, it can interfere with their education sometimes because an ADHD person will have their own perspective on how to learn and how to process information and express it and what they think demonstrating a good education is, and that might lead to clashes with their teachers or the professors or their fellow students. Like, even an example, even Einstein himself, Albert Einstein, is strongly suspected to be ASD himself, higher functioning, and he often clashed with his professors and his fellow students when he was a college student, and even in high school. He was obviously brilliant, but he couldn't get along very well with others, and very much had his own ideas on what a good education looks like. Physical stimming is simply using a motion that is repetitive and in a way comforting because you're in control of it and can act as an emotional anchor in a world that often stresses you and confuses you. It should be noted that, strictly speaking, all people use stim sometimes, like jiggling their foot while sitting or tapping on something when they're nervous or they're stressed, but ASD individuals in particular do this a lot because of the aforementioned stress and how coping with others and their social anxiety. So their stimmings often be more pronounced and more frequent. And some common ones I've read about include rocking back and forth in a chair or spinning around in it, or tapping on objects around them, or even hand flapping. I personally haven't seen what hand flapping is, but I can imagine it. And as for myself, I use a lot of pressure with or on my hands, like pressing my fingers together, pressing my hands on my chest, gripping an object, touching objects a predetermined number of times. I try to be solid about it, but I do it whenever I need to, and sometimes rock back on my heels a little bit. Try to be solid about it. I'm actually not sure how much people notice it or not, or how much it bothers them or not. I simply can't tell because no one ever says anything, so I just hope and assume that it's not a big deal. I'm guessing that might be the case for some other ASD individuals with their stims that, unless someone speaks up, they're not sure how troubled or annoyed someone else might be about it unless they speak up. And doing stimming very rarely will hurt anyone or anything. It's just simple repetitive motions, although it may disturb or confuse someone else unless the ASD individual might explain what they're doing and why. And that doesn't mean they have to, but they could. Yeah, so good. Get a little dry mouth. I've done some research on a more established relationship between an ASD individual and a neurotypical or NT person. The paradigm I read about was an ASD man in a relationship with or married to a neurotypical woman. And there are, of course, other paradigms like same-sex marriages where both people ASD, or it's the woman who is ASD but not the male partner, but those are relegated to other sources, and this is the paradigm I was closely studied of. ASD man married to a neurotypical woman. And every marriage is different and every person is different, but some general trends I've read about is that ASD will at the very least complicate and affect the marriage and might often make things more difficult. After all, ASD partners often have a limited capacity to express their emotions or their empathy or physical intimacy with their partner in any capacity. And while there's a misunderstanding that ASD individuals have no empathy or sympathy at all, this is only sometimes the case. In other cases, they just express it in a way neurotypicals don't expect or aren't familiar with, so they seem distant and unattached. They may restrict their physical touch of hand holding or kissing or anything like that. So sometimes a neurotypical spouse will feel that they're not being appreciated or that they're being ignored. And in fact, that's not actually the case. The partner simply feels less need to express it or just takes it for granted or expresses it in ways the other partner doesn't really expect. Such as a ASD partner who was blamed for something might, instead of openly apologizing and explaining himself, might make it up to his partner by cleaning out the garage or repainting the wall or something like that, basically being busy. And to them, that's an obvious and normal path to take. They don't even realize that their spouse doesn't actually recognize what they're doing for what it is. And sometimes this will even impact the neurotypical partner's own social life, such as having house guests over might be difficult because friends, family, or coworkers might be confused or upset by the ASD partner's behavior and the way they speak or how they're withdrawn, and that can make it difficult to entertain guests. And in other cases, the neurotypical partner can go out to have their own social life, but they may feel guilty about leaving behind the ASD partner, or the partner may express feeling left out, and it might limit the neurotypical partner's options. And this is not to say that these marriages are doomed in any sense, but they're often complicated, and both partners should be prepared to deal with these complications so they can get through it. And they can, of course, find creative ways to make use of their ASD and one of the partners, such as they could negotiate to come to an understanding that the neurotypical partner has social needs that the ASD partner doesn't, so it's not an act of abandonment when she goes out with friends and he's at home, for example. Or the ASD partner may make good use of his strong focus to do a lot of housework and pursue other projects. And may also be noted that sometimes this paradigm can be helpful because this is only a generalization, but ASD men often show behavioral traits that neurotypical women find very attractive. For example, ASD men often don't feel the need to express a lot of typical obvious masculinity that other men do, such as going out to drink with their friends every night, or roughing up with their friends, or watching and taking part in sports all the time, or loving action movies and monster trucks. ASD men are often quieter and more focused on what they're doing, and I may have to research this a little more, but the overall paradigm is that these men have a bit more overlap with how neurotypical women act and think than regular neurotypical men do, so it may make forming a connection a little easier in some ways. In some ways, this connection is more difficult because of social anxiety or repetitive behavior, but in other ways a little easier because of their similar ways of thinking. And as for my personal perspective on this, I haven't been in a long-term relationship before, but I can vouch that some ASD men such as myself don't feel the need for constant outward displays. I've never felt the need to be the fastest person on the sports field, or take part in a drinking marathon, or roughhouse, or yell loudly or use curse words. I find it very shallow and tedious. I find it very annoying when other men and teenage boys, to me, inexplicably feel the need to constantly shout their masculinity from the rooftops, I could argue. It just seems like a really strange way to act, and to me it almost seems immature and vain. And that's just my, not that it necessarily is though, it's just my personal perspective. As an ASD individual, I know very much what I like to do and what I don't, and I don't feel the need to advertise it. So I myself am of course secure in my own personality and my own masculinity, but I don't feel any need to show it off. So I haven't necessarily been bullied a lot for that, but some of my classmates in high school are sometimes noting that they didn't like sports very much, and we're in elementary school, I much preferred art class to gym class. So I might have gone off a little lucky that I wasn't bullied or teased more for that. ASD individuals often have only a few topics of interest and focus on them very strongly, often to the exclusion of everything else. And that these can be fairly broad topics or extremely specific ones. Like broad ones, like in my case, creative fiction. I am deeply fascinated by creative fiction in many forms, excluding poetry. I'm not interested in poetry. About how to write it, the techniques of creating fiction and expressing your ideas, editing and revising it for publication, or just reading it myself. It's almost all I ever think about, and I'm deeply invested in it. I spent a great deal of time and effort thinking about creative fiction, what I'll write next, or why, exploring new ideas, trying out new things for fiction ideas, looking at publications, joining forums, is almost always on my mind, and it's related to how I personally have a very large vocabulary and excellent written and editing skills. And ever since 2006, when I took up this hobby, well, I've written a great deal of fiction, over 3 million words of it in the last 10 years, which is probably a stack of volumes about this high, at least. And I've done it a lot, I want to keep doing it, and I don't see any reason to stop. And I also have a particular interest in history and studying language. Like, I could even tell you all the categories of the modern English language. It is a Indo-European language, it is a Germanic language, it is West German, Anglo-Frisian, Anglic, Modern English, in that order in language categories. The average person can't tell you that English is West Germanic and Anglo-Frisian, but I could tell you that, because I find it very interesting. So the good news is, even where an ASD person's interest is even more narrow, such as studying star charts, or learning how certain species of flowers grow, or learning 13th century French history, or even how specific woodworking is done, or woodworking glues, something that specific could be turned into something very lucrative for their college education and for a job. To put it a bit bluntly, it can be weaponized in a sense, but in a much more benign sense. That your narrow interest could be useful if you find a job for it, because in effect you've been studying and practicing your whole life to do it, and you go into college already on par with everyone else, if not far ahead. But of course, even someone who is highly skilled and knowledgeable in their chosen field, whether it be botany or star charts or anything else, they are still a proper employee at their workplace, and they have to explain their particular needs to their boss and their coworkers, and they shouldn't necessarily try to coast on their advanced knowledge and interest alone, and more on that soon. And someone going into college or vocational school may apply for certain scholarships and other grants, and there are some for individuals with mental difficulties, and that could be very helpful. One of the other negative aspects of ASD, and this varies person to person, is suffering from meltdowns and lockdowns. And an ASD individual may build up a lot of stress, and this will lead to one of these or the other. And when a person is suffering a meltdown, it should not be confused with anger or a tantrum. Rather, meltdowns is basically a sudden and uncontrollable outlet of that stress, a way to cool down and vent it. And this is rarely, if ever, done with malice. It's really just done out of personal need. And when a person is having a meltdown, though, it may look that way because they may shout a lot, they may throw or hit items, and it just looks like a tantrum on the outside, and for everyone around them, it's best to simply give them space and let it wear itself out, because it will. It will only last for about a few minutes at most, unless an extreme case is coming up. Based on what I've heard, a meltdown should only last like 2 to 10 minutes at the very most. But of course, having a meltdown versus intentional abuse towards someone else are distinct, and if a partner or a coworker or someone nearby is positive that they're actually being the target of abuse by the ASD person, they may want to take appropriate action. So as I've read, even emotional disconnects or differs in interest or stress levels are not excuses for intentional abusive behavior. And it may also be noted that a meltdown, it may be unpredictable, and when a person is suffering from this, they may get into unintended trouble. Like I once read a short news article that a man working at some office, he had ASD and for the most part got along with his coworkers, but he had a meltdown. Someone felt unsafe around him because they thought he was trying to attack them, and therefore he was fired, even though it wasn't actually trying to hurt someone. So it varies by case, but some ASD individuals are prone to meltdowns, may want to explain this to relevant parties. And then conversely, a lockdown is not an outward expression, but an inward retreat, which is when the person may physically not move. It's when they cannot make any decisions, when they cannot think clearly. They they're physically and mentally paralyzed for a short time because the stress has reached a point that they're unable to keep functioning. And this too is temporary, and not like a meltdown, it might last longer or it might not, and it should also just be allowed to run its course, and this person might be fairly unresponsive. And personally, I don't really get much in the way of meltdowns, and most very minor ones, but I can get lockdowns at times that something is stressful or unexpected or otherwise I don't like it or don't know how to handle it, I will stop. I try not to move, I won't talk even when someone talks to me, and I find it very difficult to make any decision or take an action. I simply have the mode that I'm waiting for someone else to handle the situation. I'm really hoping someone will, because I feel like I'm completely paralyzed or stuck in a tar pit and someone else had better take care of it, because I can't do it. And this isn't severe in my case, but it can happen. If someone's pressuring me to do something, or is upset with me, or something bad is happening, such as I'm lost, or something is damaged, or anything like that, I'll react very slowly or not at all. I'm hoping someone else will take care of it. I'm trying to rationalize what happened. I rarely, if ever, snap into action. And this can sometimes be confusing to those around me, but it's simply a need. And this thing is also I could say this manifests as miniature lockdowns, I could say. That's not an official term. When I face a decision, I often have difficulty making a decision when it's forced upon me. I can't decide. I'm pressured by it, and I respond by not doing anything. Decisions are easier when I'm planning something. I know what's happening and decide for myself. In other cases, something happens to me. It's very difficult for me to decide. I just kind of freeze and wait for someone else to take care of it. And this might not be rational because that might not necessarily be the case. It might not reason for someone else to come along and help out. My mind immediately reacts that way as though expecting it. I think. A person with ASD may or may not choose to disclose this condition to others based on need or preference. Someone with a strongly suspected case, or someone who is properly diagnosed may not choose to disclose to friends and family, their spouse, their coworkers, or the boss, or the students at their college. And the reasons to disclose it will vary. And disclosing it may or may not actually complicate a relationship with a dating partner, or a spouse, or a friend. And of course that will vary. Some other parties will simply accept in stride and just react along the lines of, oh, so that's why I have these special needs, I see. Or they might be troubled by this and think, if you have such limited empathy and narrow interests, you might not be able to satisfy me as a long-term partner, so we should stop seeing each other. It could go either way, and it's best left to the ASD individual's discretion. And I would argue that no ASD person should feel pressured or obligated to disclose it except in extreme circumstances, such as explaining to a boss or a manager is upset with their behavior. Because at a workplace, it may help to disclose it to a boss to explain this person's special needs or a need for accommodations within reason, such as sensory issues, such as I don't like bright lights or a lot of noises or strong odors, so I don't want an office close to the kitchen or close to some source of noise, or I have poor communication skills, so don't put me in a sales position. Or I sometimes get minor meltdowns, so please don't be concerned, it'll run its course, something to that effect. And as for me, I was not diagnosed until last year. Before I graduated from college, I worked a few jobs, so I didn't even have the chance to disclose it to classmates or coworkers. But if I could have, I probably would have. And it's because I've had some of my jobs jeopardized because of my ASD behavior. And one of my earliest jobs is at a sub sandwich shop, and I started taking it for granted. I knew that I was underemployed and a bit frustrated with that, so you could say I took some shortcuts, and I had some very minor behavioral incidents that to me seemed perfectly irrational, but my boss did not like them. And he was saying how I was starting to get very upset with my behavior, and I was bewildered. I couldn't see what could possibly be wrong. It seemed to come out of nowhere. Then at another job, I had a temp job at working a textbook warehouse here in town, and it was utter busy work, and I could not stand it, so I was waiting for the temp job to end. And until then, one day we were just doing actual busy work and just restoring the books, and it felt so beneath me. I'd often take a book and check its contents because I like books, and I simply did not care that my managers didn't like it. It hardly even registered to me. I could only think about what I wanted to do. which is a sort of mind blindness. You can only think about your perspective, your interest, and you're completely unaware and don't even factor in what other people think or feel. Not out of malice, but simply out of a lack of ability. And I did that one too many times. I was sent home for the day without pay. I was allowed to come back the next day, but it was a disconnect of what they expected me to do versus what I felt entitled to and what I thought was proper. And it sometimes interfered with other jobs too, when coworkers and I would goof off a bit and I saw no problem, or I would draw funny pictures on the dry erase board and my manager was upset and I couldn't understand. It took me by total surprise, like, it's a dry erase board, wipe it off, why are you upset? Experiences such as that. But the good news is, in my current job, I work from home on a computer, so it's not even possible to have incidents like these. But if I worked at a public place in a building with other people, I'll probably disclose early on, especially if one or two incidents took place. So I'll do that to smooth everything out, to make it clear that I'm not a problem person and that I'm acting out of malice. Quick. An overall conclusion to this is simply a recap that every person is their own person, and an ASD individual can get their diagnosis and or disclose it and figure out ways to make the most of their condition and minimize the harmful aspects, to basically try to live the best life that they can. And it should also be noted that having ASD doesn't have to overshadow every aspect of your life. Like, you don't have to use that as an excuse for everything. You don't have to artificially limit yourself or deny yourself certain experiences based on it. And basically, it doesn't have to be on your mind at all times. It's just a part of you, the way your size and shape of your ears is. And of course, if an ASD individual wants to, they can check with online communities. There are support groups and forums for ASD individuals and those who know them, or even in-person groups for support if they're interested or feel the need. And overall, they can try to use their condition rather than have it use them, in a sense of using special interests and their quiet focus on their interest for a college career and a proper career, and maybe even for, in terms of housework too, getting certain repair work done. And overall, it doesn't have to control them. All I can say is, having ASD isn't necessarily entirely a curse, not entirely a blessing. It's simply a way of being, and the more an ASD person understands themselves and figures out a way to handle it, the better off they might be, and the better others can understand them and get along with them. And that's what I'm trying to do to some extent, and I just get along the best I can. And I think that's all I can say.